Once the Attitude Era was done with and WWE created their own competition by splitting the roster in half, Vince McMahon famously told those that were looking for superstardom that he wanted to see some ruthless aggression out of them. Plenty would prove to have this trait in spades, whatever the hell it is, and go on to become major names between then and WWE turning TVPG in the summer of 2008 and beyond. Not these lads though, unfortunately. Ruthless aggression, more like gentle meekness. I'm Adam Pachisi from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 ruthless aggression superstars that you don't remember. Join us. Number 10, Gunner Scott. Brent Albright was a big player in Ohio Valley Wrestling, reporting to the WWE Developmental League in early 2004 and winning pretty much everything, becoming the first OVW Triple Crown winner in the process, en route to the main roster. Debuting as a member of the SmackDown crew, Albright was renamed Gunner Scott and gained a quick win over a distracted Booker T in his first televised WWE match. Later, he was praised by Chris Benoit in a backstage segment, and it soon became clear that old Gunner was going to be paired with the Rabid Wolverine in a student-mentor scenario, which made a lot of sense since Scott looked and wrestled a lot like Benoit. Unfortunately for Gunner though, they only tagged together the once, a hard-fought victory over Booker T and Finlay before the Crippler went on sabbatical. From there, Gunner's days were numbered and he quickly became fodder for others like Finlay and Ken Kennedy before being shipped back to OVW and then subsequently released. His case wasn't helped by Fit and fellow road agent Dean Malenko reportedly complaining that Scott wrestled too similarly to Benoit. Damned if he did, damned if he didn't. Number 9, the Heart Throbs. Look at this pair of absolute throbbers. The Heart Throbs, comprised of Antonio and Romeo, were quite clearly a case of all style and no substance. To be honest, the style part is arguable too, isn't it? They had their goofy entrance routine, complete with feather boas and silly hats, their dumb dance moves clearly designed to provoke some sort of reaction from the WWE audience, but the act was blatantly small time, and once the bell rang, they didn't have enough to overcome the suck. Losing in their debut match to World Tag Team Champions William Regal and Tajiri, the Heart Throbs continued to put others over on the regular and never managed to build any sort of momentum. They lost to everyone, including 3 separate handicap matches to Kane, The Big Show and Viscera, which really should have clued them in on where they stood in the pecking order. It was hardly a surprise when they were both given the boot, less than a year after their debuts after mainly wrestling on weekend show heat. Number 8, the Gymini. You know, for our next forgotten ruthless aggression tag team, I almost considered putting the Dicks here, but I thought, why go for the Dicks when I could go for the Johnsons instead? Easy come, easy go. Yes, the Shane twins, who famously donned those flesh-toned full bodysuits in early TNA, showed up in WWE as the Gymini, the nondescript protégés of funny fitness freak Simon Dean. Jake and Jesse were well-travelled by the time they got to WWE TV in early 2006, and though they had the whole twin thing going for them, they weren't much to shout about in the ring and were in fact several leagues behind fellow bald lookalikes, the Basham brothers. They got to look strong against the hard-working Paul London and Brian Kendrick on their SmackDown debut and racked up further victories over teams like William Regal and Paul Burchill and the Mexicals. WWE quickly lost interest, mind, and sent them down to Farm League Deep South Wrestling. Though they continued working the occasional dark match in the hope of getting another shot on the big stage, the duo were released in early 2007. Number 7, Jesus. Christ, does anybody remember this tall drink of water? Aaron Aguilera had been on WWE's radar for a while and had actually wrestled for the company as one of the conquistadors during the brief angle where Edge and Christian were masquerading as the team. He was brought back into the fold 4 years later to act as new arrival Carlito's bodyguard. Jesus was, in the storyline, accused of stabbing John Cena in a nightclub, an angle done in order to excuse the Doctor of Thugonomics while he flew to Australia to film The Marine. When Cena returned, he began to feud with Jesus, leading to a United States title street fight at Armageddon. On the night, the champ absolutely crucified his opponent in what would turn out to be Aguilera's last WWE outing, save for a loss to Ron Simmons on Heat a couple of years later. Aaron actually went into the Armageddon bout with 2 herniated discs in his neck, as well as a torn groin, and was released a few months later while recovering from major surgery. Number 6, Dan Rodman. A contestant on the $1 million version of Tough Enough, Dan Rodman may have not bagged the big fat contract, which was actually for $250,000 a year over 4 years and WWE could cut you after the first one, but he did impress officials with, I'm not entirely sure actually, but if I had to guess, I would probably say his size. He didn't immediately sign a developmental contract, but eventually inked a deal in 2006. He reported to Deep South and worked a series of dark matches before hitting the road proper in 2007. While mainly wrestling on house shows, Rodman did show up for a few matches on Sunday Night Heat. In one of them, he lost to Val Venus, and in the other two, he traded victories with Eugene. Like many of his ilk, Rodman may have had the size and a kind of goofy sort of charisma about him, but he was never able to put it together between the ropes. His highlight was probably a house show bout with then WWE champion John Cena, his last for the promotion before being released 2 months later. Number 5, Casey James. Casey James, who had enjoyed a successful run in Puerto Rico in the early 2000s, was brought up to WWE's main roster in the summer of '06. Debuting on the SmackDown roster alongside Idol Stevens, the pair were Michelle McCool's teacher's pets and soon set their sights on the tag titles, which then belonged to Paul London and Brian Kendrick. James and Stevens were as thrown together could be, but their work inside the ring was solid enough. The high point of their brief stay on the blue brand was undoubtedly their excellent loss to the Hooligans at the No Mercy pay-per-view, a real unforeseen gem that came out of nowhere. Sadly, Michelle sustained an injury, and shortly after, the team quietly split up and went back to developmental. Stevens would later go on to find success as Damien Sandow, but things wouldn't turn out so well for James. He was brought to the ECW roster with the name James Curtis as a jobber, suffering the indignity of staring at the ceiling for, of all people, Braden Walker, before being future endeavored. Number 4, Johnny Parisi. One of the highlights of latter-day ECW, Johnny Swinger wound up in TNA when Paul Heyman's promotion closed its doors. After being used less and less, however, Swinger asked for his release, and after being made to wait a while, was ultimately granted it, becoming the very first person to ask for and receive a release from the company. Figuring the grass would be greener on the other side, he put pen to paper on a 3-year WWE deal. The grass, as it turns out, wasn't exactly greener, more like a brownish yellow color. Swinger, now going by the name Johnny Parisi, wrestled a handful of televised matches over the course of the next year and a half, all of them on heat, and all but one ending in a loss. According to reports, Johnny, frustrated with not being used, was constantly pitching ideas to creative, but they were all shot down. After calling talent relations chief John Laurinaitis and inquiring about his plans and whether he would be involved in the upcoming ECW reboot, he quickly discovered that he would be better off taking his chances elsewhere, asking for and receiving his release. He returned for one night a year later, putting Ron Simmons over on heat. Just like old times. Number 3, the entire juniors division. According to former WWE writer Court Bauer, he and others working on SmackDown in 2005 wanted to reinvigorate a flagging cruiserweight division by signing the likes of Ultimo Dragon, Mystico, and the 3 men who would go on to portray the Mexicools to contracts. Per Bauer, the list he submitted to John Laurinaitis was then promptly torn up, with the talent relations man instead doing his own thing and signing up a bunch of Mexican mini wrestlers for a mooted juniors division. The juniors were added to SmackDown TV by nefarious network exec Palmer Cannon, another ruthless aggression, remember him? And only made a few televised appearances in total, wrestling the same tired comedy matches. There was talent in the juniors division, no doubt, but the concept was presented as a total joke, almost as if WWE wanted their fans to believe actual children were hiding under the masks. WWE had actually experimented with a minis division in the past, way more successfully than here. Summing the whole sorry affair up, the entire division was released in one fell swoop. Super Porky, we hardly knew ye. Number 2, Sylvester Tury. A decorated amateur wrestler who won an NCAA title in 1993, a year after losing on points to some up-and-comer called Kurt Angle, Sylvester Terkay certainly had the size to be somebody in the pro game. After training with California promotion UPW, the same place a young John Cena was discovered, Terkay was signed to a WWE developmental deal in 2000 and then was promptly released, went and made a name for himself in Japan as both a wrestler and mixed martial artist, and then was re-signed by WWE WWE in 2006. Debuting on TV with a convincing win over Matt Hardy, Terkay, with Elijah Burke in his corner, went on a short winning streak while also helping Burke win his matches. Supposedly being groomed for a top program opposite The Undertaker, WWE certainly had high hopes for Sylvester. Feeling as though his MMA-influenced style wasn't quite catching on, it didn't take them long to give up on the project, transferring him and Burke to ECW and immediately surrendering their unbeaten streak to the Hardys. Rather than being the next Brock Lesnar, Sylvester was released along with several other talents in January of 2007. Number 1. Frankie Kazarian. Prior to making a name for himself on the Indies and in TNA, Frankie the Future Kazarian had tried to make it to WWE. He'd done extra work along with wrestling in dark matches and doing job duty on Sunday Night Heats, but WWE never really gave him a serious look. They did become interested after he'd become a star for Dixie Carter though, signing him in February of 2005. And then, Frankie had to sit at home for about half a year before WWE bothered to actually bring him to TV. Kazarian received a mini push of sorts on Velocity, getting the better of fellow cruiserweights Nunzio, Funaki, Scotty 2 Hotty, and Paul London. Already unhappy with being put on the low-priority weekend show, Frankie balked at the suggestion that he'd cut his hair and was told to pack his bags. The decision was supposedly a mutual one, with Kazarian later reflecting that he probably wasn't mature enough to handle being in that environment at the time.